Well, we're almost through, but let's talk about specifically the armed combat, which we've kind of touched on through some of the different shows. But when you're wielding large broadswords or you're getting into rapier fights or things like that, what are some of your top tips when it comes to using
Okay.
those kinds of things?
So number one, and this is true for any strike, right? So striking with the hands is a lot more like using weapons than grabbing. And this is the hardest one to maintain and the one that I find myself yelling out when I'm watching rehearsal. And I encourage the fight captains and any assistant stage managers who are going to watch them in my absence to do. Never move your feet and your hand at the same time.
Mm.
So in a real fight, if I were to throw like a lunging jab, I would move my foot and my hand simultaneously towards you. It increases my reach, right? It increases my power. It magnifies the perceived speed of the punch, right? The distance that my hand has to travel to get to you is decreased because my body is closer. And that's how real hits happen. And if you have stage combatants who are trained, even barely trained in martial arts or boxing, they're the hardest people to get to do this, right? So the feet and the hand should never move at the same time. So if you're throwing a swinging blow, right? So a slash or a haymaker punch, or even a cross, like a straight cross with the right hand, it's load the blow, then put the foot in the finished position. And this is where I have the performers do a check. So when I load and step, I'm looking you in the eye. And your permission to me to throw the blow is to look at the thing that I want to swing with and back at my eyes. And when we rehearse, this gets super, super fast, right? But so I step, load, wait for the look, and go. And that way, if anything goes wrong, it lands with less power than if I had my weight coming forward. And
Yeah.
on a thrusting strike, like a rapier jab or whatever, it's just the opposite. So I straighten my arm. I should be far enough away that it's not dangerous. And I'm going to miss you to the sides anyway. And then you look at me, you look at my hand, you look at me, and then I send my leg forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that it does two things. It makes it safer, which is good, right? That we're checking in and I'm never coming at you with my weight and my blow at the same time. So if we make a mistake, physics is on our side in terms of injury. And it helps the story, right? Because those little looks and checks increase the amount of time that I spend in the load, right? So that anticipatory feeling that the audience gets is just sort of drawn out a little bit. And once you rehearse a lot, like you should never go full speed on stage ever. So as fast as your performers can be, they should probably never go more than 70%, just so we can see it, so they can stay safe, so the weapons don't break, right? Like real weapons take a lot of wear and tear over the course of rehearsal. And so, right, saving money on
Yeah.
replacing swords is also good. I mean, a decent stage combat sword that's not going to fall apart is going to cost, I think, a minimum of $150.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things, never step and strike at the same time. If you're swinging, move your foot first and then the swing. And if you're stabbing or thrusting, move the arm first and then the foot. And then, of course, never aim at the person.
Mm-hmm.
So fists are a little different because they're easy to tell when you miss. But if I have a sword and I'm supposed to be swinging for your neck, I'm really swinging right here.
Mm-hmm.
So that, again, if something goes wrong, you get hit on one of the most durable parts of your body. And as actors, the last thing we want is to get hit in the face.
Right.
And or you can swing above the head. So just over the top. And if your partner doesn't duck, the contact still misses. But when your partner ducks, it looks like they avoided the blow because we're really bad at depth and distance perception.
Mm-hmm.
So if a sword is 6 inches above my head, but you load it way back here and you start your swing, and I duck by the time it's about 180 degrees out or even 45 degrees out. By the time the sword gets to where it would have been above my head, your brain has lost that distance. And if I just duck a foot and a half, you're convinced that I dodged the blow. And that's another one. A lot of people like to have swords come in at like the face level, and there should never be metal or wood should never come in at these heights. It's always arm above the head, next to the hip.
Wow.
So you're avoiding those soft places, right? Like never go for the squishy parts of our sides that we wish we didn't have. Right? So you aim at the arm height because triceps and right your humerus are pretty durable and can take it, or you aim off the hip bones, right, rather than the squishy parts of the abdomen. So if something does go wrong, you've got a lot of body there to help protect you, and not anything really vital.
That's super helpful. Now, one thing I thought about, Mike, when you were talking about the separation of movement, it kind of reminded me when I was studying animation. And of course, in animation, there's a lot of focus on the overall graphic shape of something and what that graphic shape is communicating to the person watching it, but also just the timing of movement. In animation, one thing that they teach, and we do this with projections too, which is only to move one thing at a time. And the reason being that there's sort of a hierarchy, like even going back to the old Disney animators, they would teach them, hey, like you move the body first, then it goes to the arm, then it goes to the hand, because we can't, as an audience member, track all of that movement simultaneously. So it really helps to communicate where the audience needs to look. That it just reminded me of that when you were talking about that as it pertains to fighting.
Yeah, and I think that there's just a lot of, the more I do this, I haven't, I guess I've been doing stage combat maybe for 15 years now, I think. The more I do this, the more I realize it is more like everything that's not fighting than it is at all like fighting, which is funny because that's how I got into it, is because I have, decades and decades of combat training. And then I had a director say, can you do a sword fight? And I was like, probably. Right. And so that's how I got into it and started studying and training with combat choreographers and figuring out how to do that more effectively. But yeah, the more I spend time talking with other people from other disciplines, the more and more I realize that stage combat is much more like everything that's not actually fighting. And if you have somebody who comes in with only the fighting perspective, I think it's less, right? The audience will not get as much. And for the same thing that you said, right? Like also there, that sort of from the center out creates the impression of acceleration, right? So if you move the body, then the arm, and then the hand, there's this idea of this sort of transference of energy.
Yeah.
That's easier to map and easier to feel when you're live. So I'm glad that I have the combat sports training that I have. I think it leads me to choose maneuvers and moves at times that people without that training, I think, wouldn't think to do.
Right.
So that's where I benefit. It's like, oh, there's a roll here, there's a wrist lock here, there's an arm bar here, there's a spinning elbow thrust, or these things that people who haven't had a grown man across with them try to beat them up might not realize could be possible.
Yeah, right.
But that's the only thing that is at all really related to fighting, right? Everything else is related to design and storytelling. And it's much more in that realm than it is in, I would say, even dance. It's though it is, once you learn it, right, there's beats and stuff, but unlike dance, I never encourage my performers to just trust the beat, right? Because if you get off the beat and I follow the beat, one of us gets hurt, which is why it's more like dialogue, right? Like I can't go without a cue, and if you forget your line, I can't just say mine. I have to change so that we're both back in the story, right? In combat, Combat
Yeah.
is just like that. Like the worst thing to do is for you to drop a move and for me to just do the right one, right? Like that never works. So yeah, the animation thing is cool. That makes sense.